Hello, everyone. Today, I'd like to talk to you about Scrum, a framework that helps teams structure and manage their work through a set of values, principles, and practices. Though it originates from the software world, Scrum is industry agnostic. Individuals, teams, and communities can and do benefit from learning and practicing the Scrum framework. Think of Scrum as a set of nested inspect and adapt loops, providing a disciplined means to create transparency and, with that, opportunities to inspect and adapt as needed. Scrum focuses on people, relationships, product, processes, and the system. In this post, I'll be summarizing Scrum and its elements. Scrum is simple. It only has 17 moving parts: 3 accountabilities, 3 artifacts, 5 events, 1 activity, and all supported by 5 values. Let's bring it to life with some visuals. Let's start with the first artifact, the product backlog. It's a list of features, requirements, and tasks, work that needs to be completed in order to create a value-adding product or service. The items in the product backlog are ordered based on their priority, with the most important items at the top of the list. The product backlog represents and is committed to fulfilling the product goal, a future state of the product which serves as the North Star for the Scrum team to plan towards. The product backlog is a living artifact. It is emergent over time. As we deliver new increments of value, each sprint we learn more about the product and its market, and put these new learnings into the product backlog to help maximize the value we want to deliver in the future. The product backlog is owned by the product owner, first of our 3 accountabilities. The product owner is the voice of the customer, an empowered individual in the organization, not a committee, one person. The product owner's primary responsibility is to maximize the value of the product resulting from the work of the developers. That's the second accountability. Developers are a collection of individuals who are cross-functional in nature and have all the skills necessary to produce an increment of value. The third accountability is the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is really a coach for the developers, the product owner, and the organization. A Scrum Master is there to help everyone get better in Scrum, to facilitate their journey of continuous improvement, and to help the organization be agile. A Scrum Master is not the master of the developers. Rather, they're the master of Scrum. Together, the product owner, developers, and Scrum Master make up the Scrum team, the fundamental unit of Scrum. The Scrum team consists of 1 Scrum Master, 1 product owner, and developers, all in less than 10 people. Now, let's look at the events. The sprint itself is a container for all the other events and is a time box of 1 to 4 weeks. The very first event in a sprint cycle is called sprint planning. This is where the Scrum team co-create a sprint goal. The sprint goal is a shared understanding among the Scrum team of what they will accomplish during the sprint and why it is important. The product owner works with the developers to identify the most important items from the product backlog that can be delivered during that sprint. And the developers determine how they will deliver the work and meet the sprint goal. By the end of the sprint planning event, the developers should be able to explain to the Scrum Master and the product owner how they're going to self-manage to achieve the sprint goal. The prioritized work of the sprint is captured in the second artifact, called a sprint backlog. This is like a plan, like a mini project plan for the sprint. It contains all the details of all the work that the developers think is necessary, and this is where the how lives, how it's going to get done. The sprint backlog is owned and controlled by the developers. Not even the product owner can add new stuff into the sprint backlog without the permission of the developers. Having said that, over the course of a sprint, the developers may discover things that need to go into the sprint backlog, and they're welcome to add those in. However, if the product owner wants to put new things into the sprint backlog, they need to negotiate with the developers. Excuse me. Sprint planning events have a maximum time box of 8 hours for a 4-week sprint. For a 2-week sprint, the sprint planning meeting should be a max of 4 hours. As a sprint begins, the next event is the daily scrum. Now, the daily scrum is the tightest of the inspect and adapt loops in Scrum. It is a 15-minute planning meeting for and by developers, an opportunity for them to create transparency, to inspect and adapt their progress towards the sprint goal since their last daily scrum, and to make a plan for what they're going to do up until their next daily scrum to keep things on track to achieve the sprint goal. At the end of the sprint cycle, the next event is sprint review. This is open to anyone. And this is where the Scrum team gets together with stakeholders to inspect and adapt the product and the product backlog. During the sprint review, they look at the work that was accomplished over the course of the sprint, the potentially shippable or potentially releasable product increment, the third artifact. Now, in order to provide value, the product increment must be usable, and work cannot be considered part of an increment unless it meets the definition of done, which is a commitment to the quality measures required for the product. For the product increment, the commitment is definition of done. For the product backlog, the commitment is product goal. And for the sprint backlog, the commitment is the sprint goal. Now, during the sprint review, as stakeholders and other participants see the product increment, and with that, they see the evolving product, they might have feedback to share, which may go back into the product backlog for consideration for next or future sprints. Now, the sprint review is time boxed to a maximum of 4 hours for a 1-month sprint. Now, at the very end of the sprint cycle is the next and final event called a sprint retrospective. This is for and by the Scrum team, not for anybody else. It is where we as a Scrum team do our dirty laundry. It is an opportunity for the Scrum team to inspect and adapt itself and how it's performing as a way of getting better. Out of a sprint retrospective, a Scrum team should come up with one thing at least that they can put into the next sprint backlog for how they're going to improve. The time box for a sprint retrospective is a maximum of 3 hours for a 4-week sprint. Now, let's talk about the ongoing activity of product backlog refinement. This is where the Scrum team gets together to get things ready for selection in a sprint planning event. It is in the refinement activity that the Scrum team co-creates shared understanding of the work in the product backlog and break down product backlog items, further defining them into smaller, more precise items. Now, so far we've covered the Scrum team and its 3 accountabilities: the product owner, developers, and Scrum Master, the 3 artifacts, the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the product increment. We've also talked about the 5 events: the sprint itself, sprint planning, daily scrum, sprint review, sprint retrospective, and the 1 ongoing refinement activity to create shared understanding of the work in the Scrum team. Now, to dig a bit more on principles behind Scrum, very briefly. Scrum is founded on empiricism and lean thinking. More on that in my next post. Now, if we look at each event in the sprint cycle, each of the 3 artifacts, they are all opportunities to create transparency that enables inspection, which in turn enables adaptation. These 3, transparency, inspection, and adaptation, are empirical Scrum pillars. All of the above is supported by 5 defined values in Scrum: courage, openness, respect, focus, and commitment. It is only by living these values that individuals and the Scrum team would be able to earnestly bring these practices to life, such that they create value. Scrum is a simple to learn, lightweight framework for managing complex work. Scrum is industry agnostic, widely used, and there are many, many individuals, teams, organizations, and communities benefiting from learning and practicing the Scrum framework. I invite you to experiment with it. Thank you for watching, and feel free to share the gift of feedback.